Good afternoon, everybody. I am so happy to welcome you to our class, and we are in for a treat. I'm basing my presentation today off of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's essay found in the Rabbi Sacks Haggadah. These are two essays coalesced into one called Freedom's Defense and the Wicked Son. Moshe Rabbeinu, as he's on the cusp of leaving Egypt, could have spoken about anything. He could have spoken about liberty. He could have spoken about the breaking of the chains. He could have spoken about the end of slavery. He could have spoken about the destination of Israel, the land flowing with milk and honey. He might have chosen a more somber theme of the difficulties and dangers that lay ahead. What Levinas titled Difficult Freedom, what Nelson Mandela titled The Long Walk to Freedom. Any of these would have been the hallmark of an amazing speech, but Moshe did none of these things. In fact, he spoke about children. This is an incredible idea. Moshe speaks about children as the Jewish people are on the cusp of leaving Egypt. And he didn't speak about children in the immediate future. He spoke about children in the distant future, and the responsibility to pass on memory to generations yet unborn. 3 times in Parshat Bo, he will return to this theme. Text 1. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this right? You shall say. Exodus 13:8. And you shall explain to your child on that day, it's because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. Exodus 13:14. And when in time to come your child asks you, saying, what does this mean? You shall say to him. About to gain their freedom, the Jewish people are told that they are to be a nation of educators. I want to let that sink in. Again, this is Jonathan Sacks's idea. As they are about to gain their freedom, Moshe instructs the people that they are about to become a nation of educators. It's profound. And in a phrase that has become so popular and so well known, and a phrase that only Jonathan Sacks could have created, he says the following: freedom is won not on the battlefield or in the political arena, nor in the courts, but in the human imagination and will. To defend a country, you need an army, but to defend a free society, you need schools. Very famous quote of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks: to defend a country, you need an army. To defend a free society, you need schools. And so the Jewish people became the people whose passion was education. And in another famous quote of Rabbi Sacks, maybe even more famous than the first one, he says as follows: the Jewish people became the people whose passion was education, whose citadels were schools, and whose heroes were teachers. What is the result of having heroes as teachers? The result is that by the time that the second temple was destroyed in the year 70 CE, the Jewish community had already constructed the world's first system of universal compulsory education paid for by public funds. Think how earth-shattering that is. In the year 70 CE, with the destruction of ritual life in the temple, the Jewish community had already constructed the world's first universal system of compulsory education paid for by public funds. Take a look at the Talmud. This is text 2, Baba Batra 21a. Remember for good the man Yehoshua ben Gamla, because were it not for him, the Torah would have been forgotten from Israel. At first, a child was taught by his father, and as a result, orphans were left uneducated. It was then resolved that teachers should be appointed in Jerusalem, and a father who lived outside the city would bring his child there and have him taught, but the orphan was still left without tuition. Then it was resolved to appoint teachers in each district, and boys of the age of 16 and 17 were placed under them. But When the teacher was angry with the pupil, he would rebel and leave. Finally, Yehoshua ben Gamla came and instituted that teachers be appointed in every province and every city, and children from the age of 6 or 7 were placed under their charge. Amazing. Amazing. Yehoshua ben Gamla institutes that teachers are appointed in each and every city from the age of 6 or 7. Friends, I want you to be able to appreciate the full force of how powerful that reality is. And I will contrast England by way of contrast. England did not institute universal compulsory education until 1870. 150 years ago. It took only 150 years ago did England create compulsory universal education paid for by public funds. This is an earth-shattering reality. Couple of questions. Yes, Ora and Alice. What did you wish to say?
Yes, when it says children, does it mean boys? I suppose it meant
yes,
because girls were not included.
Boys and not girls. Yes. Good. Any other questions on that? Yes, Lewis.
Even though it was mandatory for all boys to go to cheder and to be educated, and it was no excuse if you didn't have the funds, because they were communal funds for people who weren't able to pay the tuition. I just want to mention that as I learned from Rachel Elior of the Hebrew University, it was never forbidden for girls to read, to study, and often the most learned girls were rabbis that had no sons, and were those girls educated? So there was never a prohibition from girls studying, reading, being educated. It's just that there were no communal funds for them. An important position.
Excellent point, valid and well received. Thank you. Alice.
No, example, Rashi's daughters in the Middle Ages.
Famous example. Famous example.
But
yes,
it's
good.
interesting that Britain has such high institutions of learning, and they never made it universal.
That's a fascinating historical point. I would love to discuss that and explore that.
It's amazing how societies look after their elite, Alice.
Yes.
Not so surprising at all.
No,
But we have a large source sheet. So
but Judaism didn't make it elitist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So important was the seriousness with which the sages understood education. We can see it by the following two passages. Look at a passage from Maimonides, writing in Spain in the 1300s, and then the Talmud Yerushalmi, text 3, text 4. If a city has made no provision for the education of the young, its inhabitants are placed under a ban. That's a ban of excommunication until teachers have been engaged. If they persistently neglect this duty, the city is excommunicated. Why? Famous passage, for the world only survives by the merit of the breath of school children. Stick that up on your fridge. What a stunning quote. The world only survives by the merit of the breath of school children. Talmud Yerushalmi, text 4. Rabbi Judah the Prince sent Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Asi and Rabbi Ami on a mission through the towns of Israel to establish teachers in every place. They came to a town where there were no teachers. They said to the inhabitants, "Bring us the defenders of the town." By the way, I can't resist. What is the Aramaic for defenders of the town? You know this, and if you don't, this will fascinate you. The Aramaic for defenders of the town.
Netura Natura Carta?
Natore
Oh, sure.
Carta.
Oh, yeah.
Bring
Notori.
us the Natore Carta. Is the Aramaic for defenders of the town. What an incredible phrase, and how it's been misappropriated. So who did they bring? They brought them the military guard. The rabbi said, these are not the protectors of the town, but it's destroyers. Who then are the protectors? Asked the inhabitants. They answered, the teachers. The teachers. Amazing. Learning Talmud Torah in its most basic format. It was the very foundation of Judaism. And the sources we just looked at show us that it was the guardian and heritage and hope of our people. And that's why when our tradition bestowed the greatest honorific title on Moshe, they didn't call him our hero, they didn't call him our prophet, they didn't call him our king, they simply called him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher, because it's teachers who are able to preserve and protect the good society. And it's in the arena of education that that free society is won or lost. However, if we saw 3 passages at the beginning of children asking, what is this Passover service? What does it mean to you? There is a 4th in the book of Devarim. At the very end of the Torah, at the end of Moshe's life, there's one more time that Moshe turns to children asking questions. Look at text 5. In the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws the Lord our God has commanded you? So we know a general principle that no word is superfluous in the Torah. There can't be repetition for repetition's sake. So if the Torah has Moshe on 4 different occasions have 4 times, children will ask you in the future, what is Pesach? Or what do these laws mean? Or in the future, your child will ask, what is this? What is the Torah teaching us? And the sages, with their ears ever attuned to the nuances of the Torah, created the most incredible midrashic imaginative invention. And they said that the Torah is speaking of 4 different typologies of children. The Torah understands that there are 4 psychologies, 4 types, 4 unique perspectives of children. 3 of these 4 examples included questions, but of varying degrees of sophistication. And therefore the sages understood that there must be 3 types of children signifying different abilities. The 4th, quote, made no reference to a question. And the sages therefore believed that this must refer to a child who has yet reached the stage of asking. And so in these 4 passages in the Torah, the sages created the 4 sons of the Haggadah. This is the origin of the 4 sons in the Haggadah. Once again, text 1 was Exodus 12:26, Exodus 13:8, Exodus 13:14. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this, right? And you shall explain to your child on that day, it's because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. And when in time to come, your child asks you, saying, what does this mean? You shall tell him. And again, the passage in Devarim 6:20. In the future, when your son asks you, what's the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws that God has commanded you? Here we have the basis of the 4 sons, the 4 children of the Haggadah. I want to focus on one son only. This is the origin of the 4 sons. This is the origin of how freedom is defended through education. But we're now switching our focus. I would like to focus on the Rasha, the wicked son. Let's jump into the Haggadah. Let's see how the Haggadah presents him. Text 6. Can you see my screen okay? Do you want me to make it larger? Are you okay? It's okay. Okay. Text 6. What does the, am I going too fast? Okay. What does the wicked son say?
Great pace.
Okay. What does this ceremony mean to you? Emphasis on that word you. What does this ceremony mean to you? To you, not to him. Because he excludes himself from the community, he denies a fundamental principle of faith. So you shall set his teeth on edge and say to him, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. For me, not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been saved. Wow, my goodness. What an incredible thing to say. Had he been there, he would not have been saved. Fascinating. What's really interesting is we find two other sources which speak about not 4 sons, but just one. We have 2 other sources in our tradition that speak about the wicked son only. Take a look at text 7. I do this. This is the Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael. This is an ancient midrash dating back to 2nd century Israel, and very, very old midrash. And the whole midrash is only on one son, the wicked son. I do this because of what the Lord did for me. Why is this said? Because it says, what does this ceremony mean to you? This refers to a wicked child who excludes himself from the community. And because he excludes himself from the community, you too should exclude him from the community by saying, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. Me, not you. And because you've excluded yourself from the community, had you been there in Egypt, you would not have been saved. Now, the fact that this source is a really early one suggests what? Who were the people writing this source? The rabbis of the Midrash, the rabbis of the Mishnaic period, because this is when this source was written. It suggests that there was a time when the passage was relating to the wicked son standing on his own. And somehow or other, only later was it incorporated into the text of the Haggadah, dealing with the 4 sons. But if we find a source standing on its own that was only the wicked son, then we can place it into a historical and halachic context. There was a time, both under Hellenistic and Roman rule, during which the Hellenistic culture had such an enormous appeal for much of the Jewish community. Many were assimilated, many were drawn to Greek art, many were drawn into Greek drama, many took place in athletic competitions. What was at stake for the community concerning such a moment? The principle at stake was one of conversion. The principle at stake was one of conversion. Jews in Hellenistic times are leaving Judaism. They're going outside of the fold. During medieval periods of forced conversion under Christianity and Islam, the principle was clear. It was changing one's religion. That was how you left the fold. You changed your religion, you became Christian, you became a Muslim. But in the 2nd century, it wasn't so straightforward. It wasn't that you were changing your religion when you left the fold. It was styles of behavior, not modes of belief. It was assimilation, not apostasy. The individuals concerned were not so much interested in giving up Jewish practice, although they did that as well, but they were abandoning, and hear me carefully, their Jewish identity. They no longer saw themselves as Jews, but as Greeks and Roman citizens. Lewis, you had a comment that you wanted to mention? You're on mute. You're on mute, Lewis. What did you want to say?
Am I good now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say, to give context, that the Hellenistic civilization was very seductive.
Yes. Yes, this is why so many Jews would try to reverse their Brit Milah during Hellenistic culture, because the Olympics were practiced naked, and the Greeks hated bris milah. You're abusing the human body, the perfect shape and form. And so seductive was it that a common practice, as painful as it would have been, was to mutilate oneself to try to appear as if you still had a foreskin. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Incredible.
It's easy to
Incredible. So yes,
imagine
it was
now.
seductive. Alice.
Isn't it easy to imagine, especially in our times now? Like, look at all the sort of Hellenistic
Yes, yes.
temptations and practices are going on now with Jews. Like,
You're not wrong.
America.
You're not wrong. How much do we wish to become like everybody else? And this actually gives us a key into an understanding of a remarkable ruling of Maimonides. Maimonides will rule in the course of listing categories of sinners, of heretics and apostates, and all people that have no share in the world to come. This is like as stronger word as you can use. What's the ultimate buzzword? It's a euphemism of like the worst thing you can do is you have no share in the world to come. In listing a list of such people, look at what Maimonides goes on to say. Text 8, Rambam Hilchot Teshuvah, Maimonides. One who separates himself from the community, even if he does not commit a transgression, but only holds aloof from the congregation of Israel, does not fulfill religious precepts in common with his people, shows himself indifferent when they're in distress, does not observe their fasts, but goes on his own way as if you were one of the Gentiles and did not belong to the Jewish people, such a person has no share in the world to come. Alice.
I would say that a lot of those would say, well, I don't believe in the world to come anyway.
Maybe, but
I mean,
that's for their perspective. We're talking internally how we would see such an individual that says, I have no identification with the Jewish people. I don't see myself as a part of the Jewish people.
So for an insider, this is very drastic.
Extremely drastic.
So for an outsider,
and Maimonides goes on to say, you've not done a sin. I mean, one would go hand in hand with the other, but technically the person's putting on tefillin, the person's keeping kosher. If you excuse me, I'm going to put my neck on the line for a moment and say something a little bit provocative. Going back to the Notorei Carta, I think that's who Rambam is referring to. These people have beards, they speak Yiddish, they have payas, wear a long black coat, keep extra strict levels of kashrut, have a mezuzah on their door. They do everything. But every time Iran says we want to wipe Israel off the map, they appear on the stage with the Ayatollahs. There is this, we are separating ourselves from the community. We don't see ourselves as part of the community of Israel. And Maimonides says, you can be as religious as you like, but you're no longer part of the Jewish people. I don't care that you're eating gefilte fish on Shabbos. You're not part of the Jewish people. It's an amazing idea, amazing idea. And almost certainly, I want to suggest that this ruling and the passage from the Mechilta, Rabbi Yishmael, that we saw earlier, refers to one and the same phenomena, namely assimilation as the abandonment of Jewish identity. I'll say that again, assimilation as the abandonment of Jewish identity. That's an interesting claim. Lynn. And then Fala. Yes, Lynn.
I don't mean to be antagonistic.
That's okay, we like all students.
But, and when you talk about being part of a community and everything being inclusive, I think that, to me, the elephant in the room is the exclusion of women. And
women not part of the community. Women are absolutely part of the community. We're talking about a person that rejects the Jewish people. We're talking about a person that rejects entirely the Jewish people. We're talking about something very, very, very drastic. But go on, I interrupted you. How would women not be included?
Well, I'll just start with the whole notion of education and how the community is supporting only one grouping of the community.
Okay, so
I'm just trying to understand. I respect.
So don't get caught up in the original division of education for women. As Lewis said, women were always educated, but they were educated in different means, not through formal schooling, but through mimetic passing on of traditions in the home. But let's put aside that for one moment. We are not referring to this at all. Women were absolutely included in the community in every which way. Okay? But I don't want to get derailed. I'm happy to discuss this, but it's going to
No,
derail us from
I'm
our
not
central.
going into a whole feminist thing. I'm just trying to establish the depth of understanding within our own community of what that means.
So
And
today,
I won't have an argument with you.
Today, women are included in the educational endeavor as much as men. In Hasidic circles, in ultra-Orthodox circles, there is no community that doesn't educate its women as thoroughly as it educates its men. Okay? Fala.
I just thought that during the Greek and Roman times, people were not as mobile. They weren't mobile like we are today. And assimilation is taking place at such a rate today.
Okay.
How is it that there was so much assimilation in those days?
The allure, as Lewis said earlier, the allure of the dominant culture, people were jumping ship. And there was an incredible sense of enticing towards Hellenistic culture. This was new, this was fun, this was exciting. This was the Olympics, this was philosophy, this was architecture, and the blessings that the Greek world gave us. This was extremely alluring. As much as things have changed, things haven't changed at all.
But the Jews weren't accepted much in those days, from what I...
In a Hellenistic period of time, the goal of Hellenism was to attract people through assimilation to practice this new sociological mode of being. They did accept people within. Yes. Elaine, you're on mute.
Okay. I just wanted to say that this has been going on forever in the Jewish world. We just finished with Purim. We know that the Jews of Shushan were completely assimilated.
Yeah.
That within about a year of their arrival, they had completely lost their knowledge of Hebrew, were speaking all kinds of languages, and they had to be instructed on how to daven, you know, how to have formal davening. So this has been going on forever. There's nothing new.
Fascinating, fascinating. And what I want to suggest is that behind this simple paragraph of the wicked son is therefore a long and painful history of Jews who chose to abandon Judaism. And there can be no doubt that Jews themselves felt betrayed by those who went over to the other side, so to speak. And this can be seen in the response and the harshness to them. This is a painful history. This is a painful history. However, we're still left with some questions. And now I want to go in a deeper direction. How are we doing for time? Okay, good, we've got time. And the following is Rabbi Sacks's analysis of the wicked son. And he starts with some questions. Listen to Rabbi Sacks's questions. Number one, has any parent truly believed that their child was wicked? Has any parent truly believed that their child was wicked? To be a parent is to have compassion on one's child. And actually, the word for womb is the same word as compassion. Rechem is rachamim. Rechem is rachamim. It's the same word. Womb is compassion. Has any parent truly believed that their child was wicked? Question number two. Is the dismissive response of setting their teeth on edge really the best way of dealing with a rebellious child? Have you wondered about that? Every year in the Haggadah, the wicked child says, what does this mean to you? To you, he excludes himself and therefore punch him in the mouth. But has that not raised eyebrows before? It's an amazing line. The wicked child excludes himself, so punch him as hard as you can in the face. What does that mean? Does that literally mean what it sounds like it's saying? Set his teeth on edge. We remember that the Jewish approach to rebuking children was modeled for us by Jacob on his deathbed, when he rebuked Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. He had rebuke for his children, but fascinatingly, it was only on his deathbed that he handed that rebuke. And secondly, the way to parenting a child who might be going in a different direction to the wishes of a parent is never to hit them in the mouth. There is an incredible story told of Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, Rav Kook, Israel's first Ashkenazi chief rabbi. And he receives a letter from a distraught father who's telling him how his child has decided to go in a different path and not keeping up the values of his forebearers. He's rejecting his Judaism. And Rav Kook turns around and says, and writes a letter to his father that says, if you loved him before, love him even stronger now. The path with which we treat our children that might not go in the direction that we would appreciate, it's love. It's always love. And it's even more love. So what is this dismissive response? Set their teeth on edge. Punch them in the mouth. What does that mean? Question number 3. How old is the wicked son? It's a great question. This is a halachic question. How old is the wicked son? If he's younger, let's say he's not yet bar mitzvah, then his question is actually correct, because what is the language that he uses? What does this service mean to you? You and not me. Well, guess what? If he's not bar mitzvah, he's not obligated in the mitzvot. You only become obligated in the mitzvot after you become a bar mitzvah. If you're a child, you're not obligated to do the mitzvah. So if he's younger, his question's correct. But if he's older than bar mitzvah, then you're not allowed to strike him, because Jewish law states that anybody who chastises an adult son or strikes their adult son is to be punished, even excommunicated, believe it or not, for transgressing the command, don't place a stumbling block before the blind. How has a parent transgressed the prohibition of don't place a stumbling block before the blind by striking an adult child? Listen to this. This is amazing. If a parent is to strike an adult child, you've transgressed the prohibition of placing a stumbling block before the blind. Placing a stumbling block before the blind doesn't mean literally to place a stumbling block before a blind person. That would just be absolute cruelty and maliciousness. Our tradition understood that to mean don't antagonize somebody or don't tempt someone to do something which you know they're not going to be able to withstand. In the event that a parent was to strike their adult child, what would the likely response be? That the child would strike the parent back. And it's another biblical prohibition for a child to strike their parent. This is a bit lengthy, but do you follow this logic? Do you follow this logic? If the child is over bar mitzvah, then the parent wouldn't be allowed to strike him, because no parent's allowed to strike an adult son over bar mitzvah, because the temptation of the adult child would be to strike his parent back. And therefore you would be transgressing the command not to place a stumbling block before the blind. Fascinating. So regardless of whether the child is younger or older than bar mitzvah, this passage still is absurd. It doesn't seem to make sense. And question number 4, What is this strange use of the phrase, set his teeth on edge? There's many words for instruction or chastisement. What does it mean when the passage tells us to set his teeth on edge? Now, having asked all of these questions of Rabbi Sachs, let me, in his own words, give you his take, give you his answer. The following, print this off, read it at your Passover Seder. This is the following from the essay in the Haggadah of Rabbi Sachs. What is the child whom others see as wicked? The adolescent, the rebel, the breakaway, really signaling by his conduct. We know what he says, but what is the question beneath his words? The inarticulate cry. Father, mother, what does Judaism mean to you? You sent me to Hebrew school. You gave me a bar mitzvah. You hired teachers for me. I know what Judaism is supposed to mean. I listened to the lessons. I read the books. But all the time I was growing up, you sent me mixed messages. When I neglected my secular education, you were angry. But when I missed Hebrew lessons, you never seemed to mind. I learned about the laws of Jewish life, but you didn't seem to keep them. Or if you did so selectively. What you said was that Judaism mattered, but what you did seemed to show that it did not matter very much. At my bar mitzvah, you were more concerned about the catering than about how much I understood of the words I said in synagogue. As I grew older, you seemed more interested in which college I went to and which career I pursued than whether I was continuing to study and practice Judaism. You wanted me to marry a Jewish girl, but you never gave me a real reason why. I know what Judaism is supposed to mean to me, but you are my parents. I am Jewish only because you are. So I ask you from the depth of my soul, what does Judaism mean to you? Let's pause there for a moment. Do you hear how he has reinterpreted the question? It's a devastating reinterpretation. And the wicked child seen in this light might not be so wicked after all. Rather, he might be like any one of our kids that we gave a bar mitzvah to. And maybe we were worried about the catering, that we sent to Hebrew school, but our hopes and aspirations was Harvard or Yale. We made sure that he had a good career. But when he was learning Judaism, okay, it was cute, it was quaint. Marry a Jewish girl. I don't know why, that's just what we do. Let's go on. Let's read his passage further. This is all Jonathan Sachs's words. This is a deep question, and it brooks no evasion. The only answer one can give, the existential response, which alone is capable of reaching from soul to soul, is to say what Judaism means to me, not to him. We must own Judaism before we pass it on. We must live it if we are to inspire those who will live on after us. The Torah says you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. V'ahavta Adonai Elohecha v'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol ma'adecha. And you shall teach these things to your children. V'shinamtam levanecha v'dibarta bam. Rabbi Moses Alshech explains the connection. He said simply, we can only teach our children what we ourselves love. What prompts such honesty? The knowledge that without it, had he been there, he would not have been redeemed. No parent can leave a child unredeemed. Therefore, to be a parent is to be willing to take one's child and walk hand in hand, part way on the Jewish journey. showing that we are prepared to live by the faith we want him or her to continue. On this reading, the wicked child is not wicked, merely confused, and it is we, his parents, who have confused him. To end his confusion, we must first end ours by asking, in the depths of self-knowledge, what Judaism means to us. It's a stunning passage. It's an absolute stunning passage. It's a challenging passage because, and I don't want it to be a guilt-ridden passage, so please don't misunderstand me. I don't want anyone to carry around guilt. But what Jonathan Sacks is doing through a historical sociological analysis of these passages and through his careful questioning of who really is the wicked son, he's saying that he's not wicked, he's confused. And it might be because of the mixed messages we gave him. What's the solution? It's for us to grow in our knowledge. It's for us to know who we are. It's for us to be able to become learned to the point where we can then show our children what we love. Our children will love what we love. Stephen and Elaine. Yes, Stephen, you're on mute.
I don't really have a question. That's quite an interpretation of the wicked son.
Very powerful.
I hadn't heard that before. And you said to read it at the Seder table. A lot of people have very big Seder tables. We used to have 30 typically. This year we're going to our son in the Boston area. But I'm wondering, so many tables have someone of mixed marriage. How can you read that paragraph?
You know, you're right. Let me phrase it better. A person always has to read his audience and know with delicacy what would be inappropriate. Yeah, absolutely right. If we are going to, in a mixed faith setting, speak of intermarriage in a negative perspective, it would touch on human sensitivities that would be inappropriate. So I would not read that passage in that context. Elaine, you're on mute, Elaine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I relate very well to what Rabbi Sacks was saying, because that really typifies my era. I know I'm not in Montreal now, but that's my hometown. That's where I was raised. And I'm sure that the community is reflected across North America and Western Europe. So it was give the kids a small Jewish education, but for goodness sakes, don't take it seriously. That was what we were taught. In fact, when I was a young adult and I started to voluntarily want to learn and become more connected to the community, I remember sitting in a shul.
Yeah.
And there were, you know, I'm about 20, 21, and there's like 3 women in front of me, and they're having a conversation because one woman is extremely distressed that her son is becoming observant, and the others are trying to reassure her that just a passing phase. This was typical. This is not unusual. This was it. But what I'd like to say is, I think we're way past that now. That is not where we are now. We're now at a point where, you know, a while ago, people started to talk about the 5th son as the one who doesn't even show up at the Seder. He's so totally alienated. I can name tons of people in my own extended family that refers to absolutely. And, but I think that we're so far from that. We're at the 6th son now, that he's so ignorant of his identity that he actually thinks he's an oppressor and he's the Pharaoh. And not only doesn't he want to return to Yerushalayim, he would like to give it away. So we're way past what Rabbi Sacks was talking about, which is very sad. That's how I see it. And I've lived it, so I know.
I think you're right. It is with a heavy heart that I agree with you. He wrote that passage over 20 years ago. And maybe they say 20 years is a generation. I don't know. Maybe in the passage of 20 years, we've even moved on to a new sociological reality where the greatest attackers of the Jewish community are members of the Jewish community. And a person only has to go to university campuses to see how, and this is the ultimate tragedy, the BDS movement and the anti-Semitism experienced by Jewish students on campus in the guise of anti-Zionism is all too frequently perpetrated by Jews in the name of their libertarian values of equality, human dignity, and ultimately the greatest value of our times, social justice. And members of the Jewish community feel that we have become the Goliath. And we are now harming the David, the underdog. And it is a tragic inversion of who we are and what we believe in. How that happened, there's sociological studies. People will put forward a variety of different beliefs. Are we there today? Absolutely. And that's sad and worrisome. And yet we are the people of hope. The Jewish people are the people who believes tomorrow is going to be better than today. It's the central message of our faith. And so we, and I will end on this, must never be discouraged. Although we have our challenges, they're not insurmountable. Although we have our detractors, we still have our message. And it's a message that the world can benefit from, and it's a message that ultimately we will be able to share with mankind when that future day comes. How we will get to the other side, I can't tell you, but I know we will get there. And that's why it's always Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. It's not yet, and it's not today, but it's next year, and it's soon. And we're gonna arrive on that other shore. Let us never despair. Let us never give up hope. And just like a parent doesn't give up hope for their child, so too God hasn't given up hope for us, the Jewish people. There will yet be better days. And on this message of hope, let's all remember Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Next year, Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim Habnuya. Next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem. Okay. I think that's a nice place to pause. We will stop here for today. I hope that was thought-provoking, and I hope I've given you something to think about, at least for the next few minutes. I'm going to, before we close, remind you all that tonight at 7:30, we have our second week of Tuesday night learning. We have a wonderful lineup on topics as varied as health matters. We're speaking about anxiety tonight, speaking about culture, looking at Netflix and general Jewish ritual, how it's portrayed in Netflix. We're looking at Jewish history. We have a Judaism 101 class. We have a biographies of the Mishnah. I will be teaching that tonight. I'm speaking about Rabbi Akiva. If you want to come into a biographies of the Mishnah class with me tonight. We also have Judaism and the arts, as a local Montreal artist is showcasing her latest project. And we have a plethora of different opportunities, all centered around a sweet table. There's Kate as well. So Judaism 101, right. So tonight at 7:30, our Tuesday night learning. So opportunities to continue learning in person will continue. I wish everyone well. Have a great day. If you can make it tonight in person, even more wonderful. And if not, I will see you next Tuesday at noon as we will continue part 2 of our 2-part series. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
very much.
Thank you.
Remind